Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Weller, and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e and difficult terrain. Now, if you have a look in the player's handbook on page 190, there is a section on difficult terrain. Combat really takes place in a bare room or even on featureless plains. There are boulder-strewn cabins, briar-choked forests, treacherous staircases. The settings of typical fights contain difficult terrain. Now, every foot of movement in difficult terrain costs 1 extra foot of movement. This rule is true even if there are multiple things in a space that count as difficult terrain. Now, this could be low-lying furniture, rubble, undergrowth, steep stairs, snow, shallow bogs. These are all examples of difficult terrain. The space of another creature, whether hostile or not, also counts as difficult terrain. Now, my situation here is a goblin cave, and the adventurers are trying to explore or infiltrate the goblin cave, and there are different locations on our map that can be classified as difficult terrain. Moving through the bushes. Now, these could be just very thinned out trees, or they could be quite dense, but moving through the bushes could be classified as difficult terrain. So each square now represents 10 feet. So 10, 20, 30. Does that make sense? Very, very simple. Over here we have some sort of blood splattered area. Not really difficult terrain. You could classify this as a slippery area and consider it difficult terrain. There are some bones and so forth over here. You could classify this as difficult terrain. Moving across the fire pit would probably cause damage over here, but it's probably going to be difficult terrain as well. Those are different elements of how you can apply difficult terrain in your situation. Okay, our goblin moves from here to here. It's moved 10 feet, okay, 2 squares. But if it decides to move across these skulls here, that is not going to be 5 foot. That's 10 feet now, 10 feet, and then 15 as we go back into normal terrain. That is how difficult terrain works. Now, what happens if you combine that with more than one element of difficult terrain? As the book already states, when you combine different elements of difficult terrain, it's still only going to cost 1 extra foot of movement, because it's still difficult terrain. Whether you classify it as being harder or not, it's still difficult, so it's going to cost exactly the same. So what happens if a particular character or a monster goes down? So these particular goblins get taken out, and you want to move across them. Now, moving across them, okay, normally it's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, okay? We can count the skulls as difficult terrain if you like, but moving through that space, since they're downed, doesn't mean you get to just move 5 foot. This is now 10 feet of movement when you move into their space. Once you move back out, you're back into 5 feet. That is how difficult terrain works in the game of Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Very, very simple. Another element to difficult terrain, if you combine that with, say, crawling over difficult terrain, what happens if you start crawling over something that's difficult terrain? Okay, so we've got our little rogue here, and they decide they're going to crawl across this difficult terrain, this rubble and these bones, and there's rocks here. So this is difficult terrain. So if they drop onto the ground, which costs none of their movement, instead of moving through that space and expending 5 feet, it's difficult terrain, it's now 10 foot. Now we're crawling as well, so now it's going to be 15. 1 square now represents 15 foot of movement. Okay, that's pretty much how it works. So what happens if you start combining things like climbing up a cliff face that's difficult terrain? You could stack that. I tend to think that it's not necessarily a sensible thing to do. You know, climbing is already sort of built in that there is difficult terrain involved, and it's hard to do. So I don't think you need to necessarily do that. But that's one element of how you could deal with combining something like crawling over difficult terrain. I know a lot of people ask that question. That's how I would do it. Tell me in the comments if you would do it differently. That's everything I have on difficult terrain. If you found it helpful, please share, like and subscribe. If you haven't done so already, make a comment below if you have any questions about difficult terrain, and I'll do my best to answer those questions. I think this video is probably enough. I don't think I'm going to need to do any more videos in the future. Until next time, keep rolling those 20s.